Do you mind?
No, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Before we start tonight, I'd like to let the people know who are with us on Zoom that we're happy that you're here. However, we made a decision last week that we could not be interactive with you. So we will not be, just because of the nature of the class, it's actually turns out to be distracting. It's not like a regular class that we're doing here. So glad you're here. Please feel free to come back each week, but you'll be simply observing the class.
I'm gonna put one more out.
So I think we're mic'd tonight, Abhijyoti, so the sound is, everybody should be able to hear tonight. So tonight we would actually like to begin with a prayer, which we neglected to do last week. So we say particular prayers here in a particular way at Ananda. I think probably every path does, but because there are a couple people in the room who have not been part of Ananda for a long time, just feel free to pray in your own way, whatever the words are that we use, whoever the teachers are that we're referring to. Every religion has them. The words are a little different. Sometimes the feeling might be, but the desire to invoke the presence of the divine in our meeting is the same no matter what language. So let's go ahead and pray together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Paramhansa Yogananda Ji,
Paramhansa Yogananda Ji,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
friend and guide,
friend and guide,
Swami Kriyananda.
Swami Kriyananda.
We humbly bow before all of you.
We humbly bow before all of you.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
be with us this evening,
be with us this evening,
as we know you always are.
as we know you always are.
Be with us in heart,
Be with us in heart
in mind, and
in
in
mind.
soul.
and in soul.
Guide our feelings,
Guide our feelings,
our understanding of what has happened in our lives,
our understanding of what has happened in our lives,
that we feel your presence,
that we feel your presence,
your guiding hand,
your guiding hand,
your pure love,
your pure love,
and your wisdom
and your wisdom
in every situation.
in every situation.
We will count on your light and your love
We will count on your light and your love
to show us the way
to show us the way
through all of the hard times.
through all of the hard times.
And we will count on you to let us know
And we will count on you to let us know
that you are always with us.
that you are always with us.
Oh,
Om
peace.
peace.
Amen.
Amen.
So I think most of you were here last week. For those of you who were not, what we do here for the first 45 minutes or hours of this, we decided not to call it a class last week because it's not really a class, but this 4-week period of spending time together is just as anybody feels to. No pressure, certainly, but if you feel to share with the group any experience that you've been through, any loss. Sometimes we've had people sharing in the past what they're going through right now, as somebody is either just trying to leave their body or pass, or whenever, something that could have happened 40 years ago in your life, but still is wanting to be looked at again, really in a way from perhaps a different, perhaps more expansive perspective. So whoever feels free to talk, please just start talking and you'll see very quickly how the conversation goes. There is a mic somewhere. Dhananjaya has the mic. Please, the only way that we will hear you is if you hold that mic very near to your, I should actually be holding this one lower, but hold it very near to your lips like he's doing. It's hard to remember, so we might remind you at times, but then it will project in no other way will we be able to project it. So I'll just put my mic down, and then anybody who feels to speak, even those of you who were here last week and who spoke, if there's anything you'd like to share, feel free. Again, this is very in the moment.
I'm just going to close the door. I think most of us are here now.
Mark, can people from online do it? Can people from online share? Seems like.
I just want to check with James. James, are you able to, we can't hear Shantala. She's on the mic. Go ahead. Okay, there we go. Sorry, Shantala. Okay. Okay.
I wanted to share that I've always had this fear of losing the loved ones to death and being really trying to work on getting over that fear. And I think their life is starting to offer more opportunities to go deeper into that. One of the things that I'm going through right now is the cat that I have. She is diagnosed with a chronic disease, and I'm not sure how long she will live. What I'm struggling with is there are concepts like too much treatment and where to stop, how much do you help somebody, and what is going too far, and how do you help somebody who's going through the process of disease and death, and you're with them, whether it's human or animals. And the other question that also comes up, especially for me being in this country, is the fact that humans are given a choice to whether to keep their pets alive or not. And that for me is so much out of the things that I'm used to coming from here, where like that is very accepted and more peaceful, versus taking somebody else's life decision into your own hands. That feels very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask if there is a balance.
I can respond. I don't, Shanti's going for her mic, so I don't know if she wants to go first. Okay. So what comes to mind, I'm just going to hold this up. You'll know it, Shantala, but this is the autobiography of a yogi, and this, you guys might know it as well. So this was written by Paramhansa Yogananda, and that's the master that these teachings are based upon. And what comes to mind in autobiography, one of the stories that Master tells is of a baby deer that he had at the school. And so in the story, he had gone away for the day, and he had a school for boys, teaching them yoga and meditation and these, a way of life, living for life. I can't think of a better way of saying that. And he said not to feed the deer, but one of the boys couldn't resist and fed him. And when he came back, the deer was very close to death. He was dying. And he was a beloved pet. All of the children loved him, and Yogananda loved him. And so Yogananda spent time with him, and Yogananda was a master. He had great spiritual power. And there was a moment in which he could save the deer's life. But the deer came to him in a dream and said, the soul of the deer came to him in a dream. And we'll talk more tonight about the soul and karma, and said, you're holding me here, and I'm ready to go on to my next incarnation, right? I'm just ready to go on in my soul's journey. And so Yogananda recognized it wasn't right to hold him, right, but to release him. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, is when sometimes it can be very difficult, but the soul is ready to go. And we were saying this last week, that there's an appointed time for each soul, and the soul understands this. It is many times, Shanti will talk about this next week, in the process of actually dying, there is a peace that quite often will come of a deeper, greater knowing and understanding, a freedom of, this is my time to go, to leave, to exit. So that's one thing I'll say. The next thing I'll say is when you're an owner of a pet, it can be very complicated, and a lot of emotions. I know I have pets, I grew up with pets, can come into play, and it can be difficult. I'll just speak from experience to know how to honor this soul's journey. I would say that the questions you're asking are questions I've asked that I have found comforting, and then being around others to help you stay in that question and to listen on a much deeper level. Tonight, I'll talk a little bit about from Yogananda's book of Karma and Reincarnation. This is a book we sell here. It's on Yogananda's teachings on karma and reincarnation. And Yogananda said, we can commune with on a soul level. So, there is a way of the quieter we become in being able to listen, to receive guidance as to what is the right thing here, the right choice. I will say that I have actually used an animal communicator. So one was recommended to me, someone who has the gift of speaking to animals. And they definitely, in my experience, seem to absolutely have that gift. And they helped my husband, James, and I with the last pet that we had, to what was he needing and what was he ready for. And I'll just tell you, since we're talking about it, she asked him, would you like assistance in leaving? Right? So euthanasia, very difficult decision. He said, I would. And that gave us great peace. So still was hard. I will say, I recognize my own emotions were agitated. It's very hard for me, but I had moments throughout the last part of his life of perfect peace where I knew it. And then my human self, my egoic self, would jump in and, oh boy, I want you to stay. So just, being real, it's just, but I did absolutely know on my own soul level, it was the right time for him. He was ready. I got help. So I really appreciate you mentioning it, because death and dying, we are affected by this in many ways. And, the loss of a pet, it's amazing the closeness we can feel to a pet. So it always struck me that Yogananda talked about it. I feel, of course, he would know this, but somehow he would know that this question would come up for devotees. They need help with it.
I think that one of the, there's such an inherent fear of death for human beings, because again, so many of us just feel like we can't, most of us are not spiritually highly evolved enough yet, that we can't relate to what happens after death. So for us, it's you're here or you're gone. And that's, I just want to say, because you raised about 6 major points when you were speaking. And so the fact that you lived with that fear of letting go of loved ones just really speaks to your humanness. And I think part of not just walking onto a spiritual path, but this particular path, something that Vivekadevi's alluding to, where literally, because of many of us in the room know because we know that we're living through this age of energy, that Yogananda could come now. Remember, he said that Christ came to teach people things when there was almost no one who could understand his teachings. So Yogananda said Christ came thousands of years ago, but his teachings are actually for us now, because energetically we can understand them. And then Yogananda came, being called the avatar of the age of energy, because we could begin to imagine that there's something after life. But it isn't until right now that people have been able to understand this, because we've come through these very dark ages, very materialistic, hard and fast. Now we can. So all by way of saying, of course, we're afraid of death and we don't want to see people go. I just say two more things that are relevant pretty quickly. When Yogananda, his most highly evolved female disciple, died, Sister Gyanamata, many people in the room know this, and one of the nuns found him crying, and the nun said to him, "How could you of all people be crying? You know nothing. Nothing happened to her. Her soul is just freed," and sort of started lecturing Yogananda, who's an avatar. It would be like lecturing Christ. And he looked at her and he said, "Of course, I know exactly where she is. I am with her right now where she is. But my human self is missing her right here, right now. How could that ever not be?" So it's a time where it's all going on in the same exact moment. Even those of us who know that at the moment of death, that soul is free. And we could celebrate that. And in fact, our astral ascension, our memorial ceremony, if you will, it is a celebration of life and of the soul. It's not like most funeral services, but at the same time, we miss them right here. So I think it takes a long time to really know in such a deep place in yourself, and to know really not just think, study, learn. They didn't go anywhere, that we can be as easily in touch as we ever were, maybe in a more expansive way, in a more intimate and intense way. This is what happened when Swami Kriyananda left his body. We must have gotten 50 phone calls that night at the minute he passed, where people, they didn't even know he had passed. People would call myself, they were calling Asha, I'm sure they called other people. Swami Kriyananda just showed up like he was in my house, people would say, because suddenly he was free of this body and he could be. That soul could, like compressed air, it could expand. But until we know that, death is just the hardest thing. And just one more thing, and that is, I don't think most people hold, although Vivekadevi just spoke to it beautifully, but I just want to say it directly. It doesn't matter what body the soul is in, it's a soul. And that cat soul, a dog soul, the deer, it's a soul. And not only can we be as deeply connected at the soul level, but they need the same help leaving their bodies as humans do. And euthanasia is a little too tricky of a topic to take on here right this minute. It's a very good question and something to talk about, whether it's people or animals. But I have helped now several people both go through their animal's death and help their animal leave. Just help them leave. Forget they're a dog, forget they're a cat. It's a beloved soul, and it changes everything then. So again, something, just acknowledging what you're sitting with and going through. And as we grow spiritually, all this whole concept of death and dying changes for us, becomes not easy, but easier. So,
Shanti just reminded me, when our kitty was passing, Letty and her husband James came into our patio and meditated, and Chidambar was there at the gate, and a friend, dear friend Bhajana, came and just started playing her guitar at our gate and singing sweet songs. And it was an extraordinary experience to have the love and friendship of those who understood what was happening and were helping us lift the energy and keep it high. Just what Shanti was saying, I hadn't heard Shanti say that she's helped people release their pets and help the pet go. It is an extraordinary experience to have friends who hold that and can help us. Thank you.
but I would say, as a physician who's helped many, many, many people pass, when I'm right with the animal, it's not so different.
Right. I'm sure it's true.
Who had
I
their-
think Atmajyoti this side and that side. Thanks.
Can you remind us of your name? I'm sorry.
Yeah, each person, if you'll say your name, just for everyone.
My name is Nathan.
Nathan.
Nathan,
So what are the teachings on, so my brother's soul has left. And if he's to be reincarnated at one point in time, well, I don't plan on dying for a while.
yeah.
So what are the teachings on when I'm gone,
Mm,
when that time comes?
Yeah.
What if he found a new body by then?
yeah,
Does that mean I do not see him again?
yeah. Yeah.
And then also, what is the teachings on your ability for your spirit to find its way to where it needs to be hindered when you are on a lot of different medications when you're leaving?
Mm,
For instance, on hospice,
Mm.
if they put you on a lot of meds or whatever, does that hinder your ability for your spirit to like leave and go and find the right place? Is that something that's taught?
It
Yeah.
is, yeah. You want to start with that?
I'll start. I'd like to say
Yeah.
one thing about your first question, and that is, when we come into this life and we're very close with somebody, as it seems you were with your brother, anyway, you were brothers, even if it was a tough relationship, it means that we've been in relationship to each other in past lives. It just happens that way. So in some past life, you might have been his mother. I mean, because, we only relate to these bodies as male and female, but that doesn't really matter what body we take. So we're speaking of the soul that doesn't have a gender. So whether you're in this body or not, the likelihood that we will continue to see those beings at a soul level now that we have been very close with in this life is extremely high. The only way we get out of that is if we transcend a lot of what holds us into this human condition, unless we get free, as the great masters are free. These masters, when we pray, we say saints of all religions. Once we're free, we don't have to reincarnate. But as long as we're reincarnating, even a spiritual family like this, I look around this room, these are my brothers and sisters. I've known these people for decades. I've known them for lifetimes. So you will definitely see your brother again, but he won't be your brother and you won't remember, but your soul will remember. So it's tricky for the human mind to make sense of it, but we come back using each other, using the vibration of other souls as a means of completing our journey. So whether you're here or not, I've often wondered, my father died when I was very young and I was very close with him. And I remember for many years, I kept praying that he would come back as one of my children, just knowing I missed him so much. I wanted to see him, but I knew I wouldn't exactly recognize him if he did. But anyway, you'll see him again, but not with those human eyes that you're talking about. So again, this is a process of growing into it. And then in terms of your growing into this depth of understanding of the difference between ego's reality, these human body ego realities, and soul realities. They're different. They're dramatically different. But if there's any comfort in that for you, that you and he will cross paths again, it's a sure thing. And it is a very interesting question you ask about drugs and hospice. I've asked this question many times because you heard me say I'm also a physician, and I've helped more people die than most people have. It's just a karmic thing for me. But I've had the feeling that when drugs need to be given to treat pain or to relieve suffering in any way, that they don't hinder the soul's journey. Whereas when people die who are hooked on narcotics or cocaine, or just recreational drugs, we call them, why we call them that, I don't know. But anyway, and I worked in that field for many years and I loved it. And most people in this room know I loved working with those people. I found them mostly to be spiritually very highly evolved souls. So I don't say it disparagingly. But when people die of an overdose or with a lot of negative thoughts and those drugs, it has an effect on the soul. So many of my patients used to come to me. They had tried and tried and tried to get clean and sober and couldn't. And I can't tell you how often people would come if they got sick. Shanti, will you help me die well? And what that meant was get clean before I die. So I think it depends on the attitude, the energy, the mindset around the drugs. That's what I.
One more question. So you mentioned that all animals have souls, which I believe too. But does it mean they have lesser evolved souls than, for instance, a human?
Do you want to answer? Sure, I'll answer that. What Yogananda said is that the soul coming in the yoga teachings, there is the absolute, which we often call God or creator. There's the absolute that Shanti talked about this last week that manifested creation. And so from that absolute, there's a movement of consciousness. And then there are these levels. It's the thought world, which is called the causal, the astral is energy, to the material world. And and with each creation, how would I say this? In creation, there are individualized souls, a spark of divinity that represents every soul. And that soul goes through all various manifestations, beginning with the mineral world, right? So it's like in terms of physical form and manifestation, Yogananda said he remembers being a diamond. So even in material that seems inert, there is a divine essence. It's asleep. So Yogananda said God sleeps in the minerals and dreams in the plants. And I forget, for animals, does someone remember? So but awakens in human beings. So the evolution of soul consciousness is this evolution of awakening. And for animals, and certain animals are, Yogananda said they're brighter in terms of closer to the human evolution. What I'll say about the difference between an animal and a human being is our nervous system and our brain. And so the human being has the capacity to fully awaken and realize their divinity. And we also have egos, where the animal will not have an ego. So an animal runs more by senses and instinct. Those animals that are pets, that are domesticated, Yogananda said very often they're close to becoming human. And part of their training to know how to become a human being is living in a human family, especially for families who relate to them as family members and talk to them and treat them in that way. So the soul of that animal becomes accustomed to what it is to be in the human tribe. So the difference between an animal and a human being is the nervous system and the brain. And the significant difference is that a human being has an ego, which also means free will. But ultimately, we can realize, we can fully awaken through self-consciousness, self-awareness, our divinity. It's not looked upon as, the word that comes to mind as, I don't know how else to say it, like, it's more evolved, I think is the best way to say it, versus saying, less than. He doesn't talk about it so much as pets are less than, because a soul is a soul and it has equal value. But a human being is more evolved. They have a more complex nervous system and brain, and with that have more potential for fully realizing their divinity. There is a story, one of our masters, Lahiri Mahashaya, he is on the left here. That was, so Yogananda is on the bottom. On the right is Sri Yukteswar, his direct disciple. On the left is Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar's guru. I think I said disciple, I meant guru. And on the very top is Babaji. And in the middle is Jesus. More people recognize in the West, they recognize Jesus. Jesus and Babaji communed to talk about, and they're said in these teachings, to oversee this planet. So they oversee this planet. But Lahiri Mahashaya, before he died, was working on a technique for animals to become fully liberated without having to be human beings. Primarily because once we become human beings, and I'll talk about this a little bit, and we have an ego and free will, we can get very lost and take a very, very, very long time to awaken. In animals, there is a purity in animals because they don't have the ego, they don't have self-interest. So anyway, it didn't happen. But I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of said a lot there. Is that making sense? Does it? Yeah. Yeah.
My card.
So-
So I looked up what is it, an astral number? Spiritual path number? I don't know.
Spiritual path number?
But it said life path number.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I'm a number 9, and basically it means I'm an old soul.
Oh,
And it says might be the last time I'm here before I.
yeah, could be.
Is that what does that really mean?
I don't know that specific, and Shanti can say, I don't know that specific teaching, but what I can say about the soul and the maturity, the readiness of a soul, I'll say this about all spiritual teachings, the practice of listening deeply within yourself for truth. To listen, does it resonate and feel true to you? And that's an important part of spiritual practice and yoga practice, is being able to develop discrimination and discernment so that each one of us can recognize our spiritual path, our spiritual teachers, those teachings that will help us. And we know it on the inside because there is an experience inwardly of, yes, I know this to be true. And that can happen even when the mind is saying, I have no idea how this is true. Right? So back to this idea of, will I see my brother again? Shanti answered so beautifully. Yogananda said, we do recognize the soul in many different ways. And so there can be this experience of, I know you, right? I know you, right? I know you. How do I know you? Yeah. And you feel it on this very profound level. right? And sometimes it's even more than that, but there is a recognition of truth and a recognition of the soul that we don't forget. We don't forget. The other thing I could say that Yogananda talks about is there are specific techniques for communing with the soul. And what I will say is that, when I study the teachings, this is exactly what I was saying a moment ago. I can believe the truth of them. I can't always understand them. I don't quite understand how someone can incarnate physically. Yogananda talks about it in this book. And I can commune with them on the astral level, their soul. I don't understand that, but I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it, right? There's just something. Now, part of it is because I've come to really trust these teachers, these masters. But I do know as time continues, I've heard others say, the more I don't know. The more I know, the more I don't know. So it's metaphysics. These are really big teachings. And it's my experience, they take lifetimes to integrate and understand. But there's no question it is possible that you are an old soul and this is your last life. So the idea is to listen very deeply, or if it feels true, and as Yogananda would say, live accordingly. Live accordingly. That's true. There's a sweet story that someone, a devotee of Masters, said, whenever I'm with you, I feel Divine Mother. He said, very good, now act accordingly. So, it's a high honor to be in that position. One's not better than the other. It's just a possibility. So part of being an old soul can be that we understand teachings very readily. Doesn't take a long time. We get them. We're ready. Because we've heard them before.
I'd like to say one quick thing, and then I want to make sure that Judith gets it. Were you
And
looking?
Jyoti too.
Whoever. Okay. Was somebody over here wanting to say something before? Just like to make sure. That is that there's a little bit of a danger in, I believe in a lot of those things. I'm not being critical of it, but that thing of I'm a ninth, so I'm a high soul, because it's the ego, usually speaking. And the ego will hold one back then from being able to live as a high soul. So it's tricky. I'm just saying, just be, the very high souls, they don't care about those things. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just, they're busy being great souls in a way, and not, the mind isn't coming in. So I'm not making fun of you, but I'm saying it's, it can just be a slippery slope to be there. So better to just live. And I think Vivekadevi was alluding to this if she didn't just say it outright. Well, she did. Behave, live accordingly, live to your highest potential, and then just don't worry about what number, because most of us are not free of ego enough that we don't get caught in that.
There's also a story, and I don't know if it was Ramakrishna, I don't remember the saint, but all his disciples were asking, when will I be fully liberated? When will it be my last life? How many more lives till it's my last life? Right? And he said, for you, then he went around and just said, for you 2 lives, for you 3 lives, for you 1, Well, he had his highest advanced disciple, which everyone recognized as his highest disciple. So clearly he would have been the one that this is your last life. He waited for his turn and, I don't know if he even asked, Master, could you tell me? He said, in 100,000 years, right? 100,000 lifetimes, you will be liberated. Everyone was just sick. They thought, oh my gosh, he's such a good man. He has 100,000 years before he'll be liberated. But his response was to dance with joy. And they couldn't really understand it. Didn't you hear what he said? You have 100,000 years more of this. He said, didn't you hear? I'm going to be liberated. What does it matter, right? That's because he was actually a high soul. And his master said, this is an example, and touched him and he was liberated. So it's just a beautiful story, all of us because how much longer, how close am I? I'll say this, Yogananda said it takes very, 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 very good karma to even want to know God. And if we think of our lifetimes of, the journey of awakening as an hour, to be in a class like this, asking these questions, to be coming here when with, such recent difficult loss, every person in this class, I've heard it said a few different ways, but we're either at the last 3 minutes of that hour or the last minute, but pretty close, every one of us. Every one of us, right? It just to be here studying these teachings. So it is comforting. But Shanti's right. Try not to focus on that.
Is there anybody else who wants to, before we come to the end of this time, we could take another 15 minutes with something in your life? Yes. Bonnie.
Close.
All the way near your mouth.
Okay.
There you
Yes.
go.
As I was hearing some of the conversation about, said about, people were born in family, would have been some related, somewhere in some previous lives, they would have been together. And that got to me a thought because in India, there has always been a saying, and I just wanted to know what Master said about it because I don't know. There is a saying that like the close families, like parents, children, brothers and sisters, like there is like at least like 7 lifetimes they would be together. I mean, they don't say 7 consecutive, but 7 lifetimes because of some of the karma they have to, each one would have built in positive, negative, however you want to call it. And you have to go through that, because you have to finish that to be 0 somewhere along the line. I'm not talking about the total liberation when the overall karma is done, but between the, does Master say anything about this 7? Or it's always been an interesting question for me.
I don't remember, or I've never read anything, if anybody knows, please, that he specifically said that, anything about the number 7.
Yeah.
But it's very clear from all of his teachings. I mean, and it makes sense that we keep coming back. I'm pretty happy to hear that it's only 7, given some of my.
I'm not sure whether it's only 7.
I'm teasing, at least. Some people in my family I'd love to keep seeing forever, and some of them it's like 7 more lifetimes. Anybody else have any? Yeah, Kevin.
You may address this later, but what you're saying is every soul knows when it's ready to go. And I keep thinking of people like this young man
Yeah,
who died suddenly.
yeah.
They weren't thinking about that. People, now that you brought up the drug addictions, when somebody, I mean, in my family, my children have been very close to overdosing several times, and it's scary. And I hate to think that because they went in a drug state, they wouldn't be able to ascend, whether they believed in this or not. So I don't know if we're going to address this. Souls are ready, but what if souls aren't ready? It's quick. You're in a war. People shoot you. Get blown up. You're not thinking, I'm going to die today.
Yeah. Very good question. Do you want to start, Shanti?
I mean, you said a soul knows when it's ready to die.
I did.
You did. Somebody said it.
I did.
I don't know that I would have used those words. However, there's no mistakes ever. There cannot. It energetically, the way that this whole energy and magnetism and soul nature of everything works. It's very hard to get to the knowing of that from our mind. So it is extremely difficult when we're trying to make sense of anything about death and dying, of many things in life, but particularly that. So were they sitting around thinking, gee, I'm ready to go, so I'll overdose today? Mostly not. You know, I don't know what Devin, right? Yeah, what Devin was thinking or not thinking. None of us really know. But you see, that's trying to understand the spirit of it with our minds. And it's a trap. It's what we call Maya, delusion, Satan. And it's that joke. Sai Ganesh was telling the same story in the discipleship class the other night. Many of us have heard it many times because Davy tells it all the time. Man's out in farm country looking for directions, finds a farmer, says, you know, how do I get down over to such and such a place? And the farmer says, you know, what you need to do is you need to go 2 blocks down there. You're going to come to a stop sign, turn right, and then, no, wait a minute. No, that's not the way. Wait, let me think this. No, when you get to the stop sign, you actually turn left, and then you're going to go a mile, and then, no, that's not right. And then the farmer looks at the man and says, you know what? You can't get there from here. And it's funny. So Davy tells it all the time, but it's so tricky, Kevin, because your mind will never make sense of this. But one thing somehow I would say, I know this now. I know it. Even in my own life with all of the struggles, the challenges, the losses, the tests, nothing ever comes to us that isn't exactly for us. It's not somebody else giving it to us. We are energetic beings. That's what we're made up out of, pure divine energy. Energy has magnetism. We draw to ourselves exactly, perfectly what we need to take our next step and our next step. And there's just no getting around that. We'd like to get around it at times. We'd like to say, what is this doing in my life? Why is this happening? How could this happen? I mean, it can be death. It can be people who take care of a loved one for 15 years, day in and day out. It's like, is this my job to be caring for this person? I'm not even saying it's your job, because sometimes the karma is that you have to find the strength to find other people to do it. But the point is, everything comes to us in that way. So it's not a thought out thing. I agree with you, but it is a soul thing, and it's never wrong. That's very hard because we want to kick and scream and yell about it, but no point in doing that. Much better to say, and I think Vivekadevi said this last week, or somebody in a class recently, we can say, why is this happening to me? Or we can say, why? Why is this happening to me? Same question, same words, I would say. So it's very hard to digest sometimes, but it's nonetheless the truth.
The other thing I would say, because I did say that, what I meant, and I really appreciate your question, Kevin, right, is, and Shanti's addressing it, she's talking about it, is the idea of an appointed time, you know, for a soul to exit. And the soul, when I'm speaking of soul, I'm not speaking of the mind, the mental understanding. So there is a soul recognition, a perfect time for being born, for incarnating, that's exactly right for someone's soul's journey, their karma, and a perfect time for that soul to leave. And when they're finished with this incarnation. You know, I will add to that Yogananda, when Shanti talked about Sister Gyanamata, and Yogananda said he kept her in her body for 20 more years so that when she died, she would be fully liberated. Now, I don't really know exactly what that means. Does that mean her soul's appointed time was 20 years sooner and he kept her for 20 years because he's the master? I don't know. I don't know. But I have heard that and Shanti, you were talking about this recently with Ronnie and trying to help people who were supporting her. This is someone in our community. I think you talked about her last week, who was passing, and everyone was trying to figure out why she's still here. How come she hasn't left? And Shanti said her soul knows what it's doing. So we're here to help the soul. It's going to go when it's ready. It's not ready yet. The soul knows. So it's a different level. That's what I was speaking to, is a soul wisdom. I'm reminded of when my mother was close to passing, and there was so much happening, which can happen in families, a lot of turmoil, right? Just incredible turmoil going on. And James and my family I grew up out here, but we were living on the East Coast, so we were out visiting. And I remember one morning, it just came to me, this mantra, this affirmation to say, my soul knows how to do that which I feel I cannot do. And I was affirming that because my mind was getting caught in the drama of everything that was going on in the family. And also my own human self with my mother dying. So I went down to the pool and was swimming and just saying, my soul knows how to do that which I feel I cannot do, as a way of helping me to stay as close to my soul wisdom, to the deepest place within me that knows the rightness. So that's what I meant when I said the soul. It's been the teaching as I understand it. And when Shanti said there's no accidents in terms of the soul's timing.
I just want to add one more thing, Kevin. Otherwise, I'll have to write you a long email this week. And I'm going to save myself that. I do not feel, however people pass, I don't care how they pass, overdoses, suicides, it just doesn't matter to me. Every soul will find its way to God.
Thank you.
Every soul.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that to rest.
Yeah.
There is a difference when we're talking about drugs. We know that. Very hard to answer Nathan's question about where souls are. We are all on the same spiritual path, every one of us, but we're not all in the same place on that path. And this is much more of a conversation than I would like to have right now, given our time. But the truth is that some people are going to have more lifetimes to live than others. So, but never do I feel hopeless about a soul. And people go through their karma. They do what they need to do. I held a lot of people as they left from overdoses. And I've seen a lot of that darkness and difficulty, but you can just look right through it and see the beauty of the soul. Just think, well, not this time, but it will happen. So I wanted to just clear that up. I'd like to say that these questions are fascinating, and here we are we're talking about death and dying, and it's just perfect, of course. But we have 2 more sessions because Vivekadevi will speak now for the rest of tonight. But I'd like to make sure that all of you, if you've had an experience or are having an experience, make sure in the next 2 weeks that you bring it up, speak to it specifically, like what's going on for you. I mean, very much like we are hearing some stories, and we certainly heard the whole, we have not by any means covered all we could talk about with Devin and that kind of loss, but we did hear that story and others. So if you've gone through something or going through something, I would like you to feel comfortable at the beginning of the classes or the sessions, I'll call them. Definitely speak up so that we can address at that very much more almost primal level what's going on for you in particular. I know there are more stories in this room because some of you have spoken to me about them, but I won't make eye contact with anybody right now.
Won't single anybody out,
No.
put anybody
No,
on.
because you don't need to speak, but I'm saying it's very useful to share your story if or when you'd like to. So,
Yeah.
Shree's gonna, what do you think?
Sure, yeah. She'll be our last and then I'll speak.
She did make eye contact.
She did make eye contact with you. Shanti did it.
Yes. I heard another speaker talk about, how I think we should pray death, and I have a similar, I had, or I still have a very big fear of losing people I love, and especially when people die out of turn, like I had a cousin whose daughter died very young, and it really, it was a very, she was not a near relative, but still it was like, she was my sister, a lot for a long time.
Closer.
Yeah. And that was the first time I realized that I'm really having a hard time, and I have older parents and very close to them. And as you know, Shanti, we were supposed to go visit India and visit my parents July 4th, that weekend. And just a few days before that, long story short, the mom just died very quickly.
Wow.
And my sister called and said she's in the hospital, leave. I just left without knowing that she was passing. Like, I just knew she was in the hospital. And then you have a 15-hour flight to Dubai. Didn't know what was happening. Then found out at the Dubai airport, all my cousins were texting me condolences. I had not even known she was gone. I just read text messages. And, it was a big shock for me because, we all have egos. I had a spiritual ego. I've been meditating for so many years. I have a strong mind. I kept meditating on the plane, and I was very sure that she'd be okay. And I just felt when the plane was landing, I knew she's not okay. But till then, I had told myself. So it was a big shock, like, why is this not working? Like, I'm so confused. And she didn't wait for me. That was a big angst for me. That's when I texted you and Sai Ganesh from the Dubai airport. I was like, I was not this calm, happy person that I'm not calm at all, but generally a happy person. I was just running in the airport like a crazy woman crying, and I lost it, basically. And then I learned a lot about myself and my fears. With all the practices, the pain eased over time, but it's just so confusing still. Like, why did this happen? What's going to happen? I'm done. I don't want to deal with it. And it's also was a divine experience. When my son was born, I had a crazy, I just was like, what, a baby coming out of my body, like a human being? And then when Amma died, then too, it was like a crazy, some experience which I cannot explain. But, and that's the reason, I suppose. I didn't even think I was coming to this class, but I just found myself here that evening last week. So I don't know why I'm here and what my questions are. Lost in the soul.
Thank you, Shri.
Yeah, thanks for, I think really all that you're speaking about just speaks to the unreality. We cannot cross this line from the mind to that world. Somehow it makes sense at a different level. And I just share a very short but funny story, not funny at all. I was very close with my stepfather, very close. And I was flying back to the East Coast like every 6 weeks to spend a few days with him. And he was sick, but I didn't think he was dying. And then I was supposed to fly on a Friday morning to see him. And everybody knew, all of the people in the nursing home and wherever, they were all very kind of almost reverential with me. Oh, Dr. Rubenstone, we don't want to bother you. Every time they would call me, they all knew I was a doctor. And my phone rings at about 4:30 in the morning, one morning, and I pick it up. And this nurse said, Dr. Rubenstone, I'm calling to tell you that your father has died. And I said to her, are you sure? And they just like that. I mean, I just couldn't. I asked her 3 times, "You're sure he's dead?" It was like, and I think she thought had lost my mind. It's like, it's not a tough diagnosis, but it couldn't make sense to me. It's just, and in a way, it never did. I mean, I let go of him in that way. I still feel very close with him. That was years ago, many years ago. But it's not logical. The soul's journey is not logical to this mind. And that's what it speaks about. And then we go through these profound experiences. And like you say, you learn a lot about yourself, but more, you learn a lot about the soul's long journey as we read every Sunday. And somehow it never makes sense to the mind, but you just know it. You just know something that you didn't know before. And if you try and think about it too much and figure it out, it's gone. Yeah. I know you know that.
I appreciate you sharing. It was perfect. Yeah. And thank you, Shanti. Perfect response. So in preparing for talking about karma and reincarnation, and we have already been talking about it a little bit, right? There were a few things that stood out to me. One is what a big topic it is. And just as Shanti was talking about, every Sunday we have, as many of you here know, but some may not, we have what's called a festival of light, and it's an allegory of the soul's journey. And I kept finding myself reflecting on that festival because it talks in broad terms about what's happening for us, right? What is it that's going on? So in terms of, just to say again, from the infinite, from God, the absolute, the life is manifested. And within that, there are these sparks of divinity, souls. And each one of us is that's been on a long journey. And we create as we move through life. I'll talk specifically about being a human being, but I've heard Asha talk about watching birds. And she said one time she saw a bird kick the other bird out of the nest. And she thought, what karma? That soul's going to remember being, mistreated by that bird and carry that forward and have to deal with it. It's a humorous way of looking at it, but in simple terms, karma is often talked about as Newton's theory about, what is put out. There is a equal response to what we put out energetically, to what we put out in our thoughts. We sow the seeds, sometimes we'll talk about, through our actions, through our behaviors, the seeds of karma. So, what I do, what I put out into the world, I will draw back to me. That's kind of a very simple way of talking about karma. But if looking at it in these teachings on a soul level, the deeper, I would say, teaching about it is that this idea that in our festival, again, it talks about this, life is a school. The soul is intended to learn life lessons, to find its way back to its home in God. So the journey with karma isn't simply, oh, I did this and so this is happening to me in a way that is purely impersonal. I don't have a better word for it in this moment. The idea with karma is that we learn from the experience. We learn from the soul, learns from what it puts out and what comes back. So over time, we come to understand, right? We come to discover that which is in alignment, which Shanti mentioned earlier, with our highest reality, our inner divinity, and that which is acting outside of it, which isn't like that. So we have to, I was mentioning earlier to Nathan, okay, now we have in a human body an ego and self and will, right? So we might make decisions. Whoops, James. Okay, we might make decisions that it says in the allegory of the festival, well, why wouldn't I be selfish? The young soul thinking, why wouldn't I keep what's mine to myself? Well, as we evolve, we recognize the limitation of that actually that's not an abundant way of living. It can seem like it, but in time, we come to discover that we receive more in giving than holding everything to ourselves. These are spiritual principles. There is a teaching in yoga of, in everything we talk about in yoga is the evolution of consciousness. So we're talking about a soul, we're talking about evolution of consciousness. So one of the teachings is about the caste system. And the caste system became something many of you may know, socialized in India, and people were relegated to a caste and they were treated in a particular way based on that. But that's never the intention philosophically of the caste system. The caste system's intention has to do with how the consciousness evolves. And it starts from a very base consciousness of Shudra, which main, primary focus is to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So sometimes referred to as the peasant consciousness. From there, Vaishya, merchant. The intention of Vaishya, there's an awakening in the soul of, if I acted and behaved in a different way, my life could be better. So instead of simply someone's, ruling me and I'm afraid of being hurt, so that's why I'm acting. The Vaishya consciousness would be, hey, I could be, I could act for myself. I could make decisions that improve my well-being. Within each one of those caste systems, the consciousness, there's the beginning and then there's the transition. So the end of Vaishya consciousness, just before it moves into ruler, I'm talking about this just as a way of trying to share this overall understanding that our souls, our consciousness is evolving. We're learning lessons and changing our behavior based on that. We learn from things that can be very surprising. As Shanti said, on a mental level, it may not make sense at all. Why is this happening? I did say that last week, but we learned to turn that phrase to, well, why is it happening? And the intention is to ask the question, is there an opportunity here for me to learn something? Shri said that, she learned a lot about herself in watching her behavior. It doesn't mean that we deny our humanity, but we come to appreciate over time that this journey is one of remembering our divinity and that which helps us live from that place of divinity. So I'll just finish the caste system just to finish that stream of thinking here, that moving from Vaishya, which is self-interest, moves into Kshatriya, known as the ruler, which is a concern for all, right? What is the best for everyone? And from that consciousness, we move into what's known as Brahman. And that place is the primary question, the primary motivation is, what is my highest self guiding me to? What does God want for me? What is God's will for me? So I'm again mentioning it from a place of, there's a phrase in our festival, why are we here? For what end are we made? Is there no lasting purpose to our life? Well, in the teaching of yoga, there is a lasting purpose, and nothing, as Shanti said, is a mistake. So how do we reconcile the events and the experiences that can feel so wrong, so outside of right timing? How do we reconcile that? I will say that for me, I mentioned last week that when my father died, I came to a place in my, the spirituality I had at that time wasn't big enough for that loss. It felt wrong for me. He had helped me. He really came into my life when I was 16. He was in my life before, but much more distant. And so he intervened in my life when I was 16 and took legal, what's it called? Not guardianship, but it's like custody. Yeah, custody. And help me get on my feet and help me get well. So, you know, I was at a point in my life, I was 27, shortly before my 28th birthday. I called her my stepmom. They weren't actually married. She had her boys who were very much in my life, but a few years before my dad died, she had a reoccurrence of cancer and she was given 2 weeks to 2 years to live, and she ended up living about 2 years. I had been gone. I had come back to finish college. So I was living with my dad, and then 2 weeks after I got home, she had a stroke, went into the hospital, and then moved in with my dad. She had had her own place, and he became her primary caretaker, and I was supporting and going back to school. And I can't remember now, it's probably not all that important, how much time passed, but it was a huge disruption in our life, in my life. And it was, and sad too, of course, very sad. But then out of nowhere, suddenly, his behavior kind of seemed odd, or I couldn't tell what was going on. And he was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. And so then, just like that, they said, okay, well, now you have, he died in 2 months. So they said, you know, like the longest you could live is 6 months. So then suddenly I'm the primary caretaker, and both of them are dying of cancer. And boy, I didn't feel ready for that. I didn't feel ready for that. In fact, I had a therapist earlier in my teens, and I called her. I was like, now I'm underwater. I was kind of hanging in there okay before, and she just started working with her again. But she didn't offer spiritual support. She offered amazing psychological support. But that's why I told you the story last week of that grief counselor. I needed spiritual support. I needed what she offered, but I was already strongly on a spiritual path. I don't know that I mentioned it. There wouldn't really have been a reason, but I will mention it now. I'm in recovery with 12 steps, talking tonight about drugs and alcohol. So I got sober at age 20. So I was, you know, coming up on 8 years sober at the time. And from that experience, I had learned to ask for help when, when needed, when life's bigger than me, and that I need to continue to increase my spiritual life in order to stay sober and navigate life. So I'm mentioning this because it seemed like, you know, the God I believed in wouldn't have done it that way, wouldn't have suddenly taken my dad. I remember, and it's, you know, I think because he was leaving, I mean, maybe I would remember him telling me this at any other time, but it was very poignant at that time. He said, I know that you don't feel ready for me to leave, and I wish so much I wasn't going. I'd love to stay. But I want you to know you have everything you need, and you're going to be okay. He said, I know you don't think it. You don't think you're ready for me to be gone. And I didn't. I felt like, how can I be in the world without him, right? I'm saying this because it sent me on a much, much deeper journey of exploring what is this thing, death and dying, right? I wasn't looking for reincarnation. I wasn't trying to understand that. I'd heard about it. It seemed reasonable, but I didn't really know much about it. But what happened for me in that journey of seeking, which I was talking about last week, is I began to, with that counselor, he began to share with me many traditions that hold death. I would say, maybe because they're Eastern, I'm not really sure, but in a broader way than what I had as a Catholic in Christianity. All of that prepared me and led me for the teachings of yoga, to these teachings which hold, as I was saying earlier, that there is a purpose and an intention for each soul, and there are lessons in every experience that we go through. And if we can stay open to that, we can tap into an inner strength within us that will often reveal those lessons to us. We begin to resonate with, well, why is this happening? Very often it's been my experience, but I will say that I use the support of spiritual teachers to help me. I talk with spiritual teachers at Ananda to help me understand when it feels bigger than me. When I feel like, okay, I do believe I'm being offered an opportunity here. It's a hard one. Can you help me? And Shanti did that last week with Padmini, right? And she was offering help to say, okay, and that is part of our practice here. And Shanti is a minister and one of our spiritual directors. So, and asked Padmini permission, right? Can I share with you? I've been deeply, deeply looking at the teachings and how they might help you. Take your next step and open up to healing. Open up to, yes, Padmini. It helped me greatly, she said. And this too.
The
Yeah.
soul knows when it's time.
Yeah.
Tell me a lot and Shanti does. Sadness and anger.
Yes, yes. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge shift. And this is why we talk about the teachings, because they can help us to be able to say, for what end are we made? What is the purpose, right? Is it just suffering? It's not. It's not. But as Shanti said, we have to acknowledge our humanness. Right? We have to acknowledge it's okay. Yeah, I see the tears and I just want to say, it's okay. This is a safe place for that. There's tissue if someone could pass it. When I was with that grief counselor, he was telling me something that was reaffirmed in yoga. And he said to me, the reason you're suffering so much is that you're disconnected from that inner, he really called it a divinity, the inner strength and divinity within you, this soul place that can walk with death, right, in an empowered way. And I said, all right, it's not, and I told him, before my dad's death, I would have loved everything you're saying, but this is so hard that I want to reject it, right? And so he kept saying, you must meditate, you must meditate. I didn't want to meditate. As it turns out, that's a different story, but I'd had spiritual experiences that were pretty strong, and I was afraid to meditate. And so he didn't care. And I found that interesting. I said, well, do you want me to tell you why I don't want to meditate? He said, no, I don't want to know why. I just want you to meditate, because inside, and he helped me begin to do that. But it's very important. I want to tell a story. Shanti mentioned last week the idea, the quote of, we are spiritual beings in a human body. Right. And I think Sri said Sri Ramakrishna. But I think what you were talking about was you said, well, I think an American mentioned it, Stephen Levine. Right. And part of what stood out to me about that is with this grief counselor, he said, I want to send you on a retreat. Stephen Levine is a famous Buddhist teacher, and he wrote the book Death and, what is it? Death? Oh, what is it, dear? Who Dies? Really extraordinary. And so he said, I want you to, Stephen Levine is this great teacher. He's coming, he's going to talk about death and dying. No way did I want to go. Right. And so every week I'd come see him. Every week he'd ask if I got tickets to go. Every week I said, no, not yet. And he said one time, I'm not supposed to do this. He's a new therapist, right? He goes, but I am buying you those tickets if you do not get them. You're going to this retreat. All right, fine. I went. I remember that very first day I walked in. It was a massive, hundreds of people were there. I walked in, and what I said to him is, I don't want to go someplace where everyone's death is beautiful and wonderful and rosy. And, it's not like that for me. And I don't want to hear people talking about that. He said, it won't be like that, I promise you. When I walked in, I saw there was a dais, a stage where Stephen and his wife were going to be. And the first, probably as big as this, no, much bigger than this circle, but the first section of it were lounge chairs and IVs. People who were dying were there. Oh, okay. I knew right away this is going to be a different retreat, right? This is going to be different. So I go in, I'm filling out my application. There's a young man standing next to me. And I looked at him, he goes, what brings you here? Or I guess I said, I don't know, I must have asked him first. Maybe he asked me. I said, my dad died. He was my best friend. I don't know how to live without him. He said, yeah. I said, what brings you here? He said, all my friends have died of AIDS. I said, yeah. And it was a place where that could be true. And Stephen, the whole retreat talked about the soul. And he said, in this culture, we don't hold death well. So it's really confusing. And we feel so lost and we don't know what to do. And you feel like you can't talk to anybody about it, right? And life's going on and it doesn't make sense. But really, it's an ancient reality. And in Eastern teachings, we've done this many times. It's not as foreign as it feels. It's not as foreign as it feels. On the deepest level, the cycle of birth and life and death, and birth and life and death, very familiar to us. We see it in all the seasons. It's all around us. And if we can learn to go toward it with an open heart, right, we will find the inner strength to be sustained through it. And he led us through breathing techniques that we do in yoga, we practice in yoga, right? And what he invited all of us to do, which really this class is all about, come right into the center of what's most difficult to talk about and find the light, because there is a light, right? There is purpose and meaning to our journey. It's not out of order. It can be very, very, very hard, for sure. It can be very hard, but there is a purpose for each. And I learned this one, and it was verified and confirmed in yoga when yoga came into my life, that I mentioned this last week, I believe, so I saw it to be true. There's an extra portion of grace that comes for the person who's leaving, however they leave, and for every person close to them to help us, right? And if we seek it, that grace becomes more and more evident to us. It is, we're not alone. And I think that's so important, not just in this way, but on a soul and spiritual level, which is the power of these teachings, these great masters. One of the things they said when I came to this particular path is, even if these masters, I was very close to Jesus, so that was comfortable. But they said, the master's only intention is to help you. So they don't, as Shanti said last week, it's not a religion. This path isn't a religion. These are teachings. It is a very specific spiritual path, but there is power in these teachings and power with these masters. And for those who are seeking help, we will be helped, right? Yogananda said, if I'm not your guru, right, if I'm not your pathway, I'll lead you to your pathway, right? And if you have a pathway and you're here to get extra support, I just welcome you to receive it, right? So that's what happened for me in that retreat, is I dropped a level of resistance. I dropped the wrongness of death. I dropped it. I did. I dropped that, okay, because I remember when my dad first died, the thought I had was, well, what does anything matter? It seemed like he left before his life was finished. So why bother doing anything? If you could just leave before you're done, what's the point, right? What we teach in yoga, what yoga teaches, is that the consciousness continues and lives on and nothing is lost. So whatever lessons have been learned, whatever awakening has been realized, when we use this term old soul, each time that consciousness continues to grow, continues to awaken. And so when we feel like, well, the life wasn't over, well, it's true. The incarnation might be, but life isn't. Life isn't over. It didn't stop. And that's what my first grief counselor was saying to me. You need to step into a new relationship now. That's an energetic relationship. I didn't want that. Okay, but here it is, right? It's a soul relationship. You can commune with this soul, right? And in the book, I won't try to find all the things. I'll just share it again. In here, Yogananda talks about, and many of you were talking last week about communing, right? So it's a journey, and it's not easy. But what I've seen, and I'm still practicing, my goodness, I just want to say that, right? I haven't mastered it by any means. But more and more and more and more and more, I'm able to feel the inner power of the soul guiding me and helping me. And I see this, what these teachings offer and why we offer this class, so that each one of you can find that light for your journey of, okay, how does this, when I say make sense, how is it right for me? Bharat, one of our teachers, he talked about karma and things that happen. And he said, imagine Divine Mother is coming to you with a gift wrapped in gold and jewels and treasure, right? And offering it to you. Now, when things are going the way we'd like them to go, it's a little easier to say, thank you. Thank you, Divine Mother, for this gift. But the teaching is, it's always that. It's never cruel. It's never insensitive. It's never, karma is not punishment. It's correction. So it can be hard, but it's correction. And I know I was feeling last week when you were sharing about Devin, right? That I thought, wow, he's really your spiritual teacher. And look at his passing has, I could see that. Whether that's true or not, I'll just say I felt it. I felt, here you are, talking about spiritual teachings together as a family, seeking spiritual answers from his passing, from his leaving. That is on a soul level extraordinary, right? The last thing maybe I'll say about karma, how was I going to say that? Let me pause for a moment. I don't know, but I did say it's never a punishment. It's always an opportunity. And what I've learned here in Ananda and in this community is that the teachings help me lift my consciousness and walk in light. I think that's the simplest thing to say. So that is what karma and reincarnation that offers us. And it's the best I can say on this very, very big topic about that tonight. Yeah. Okay, so we'll be here to connect with you and answer questions if you have them. Let's just take a moment and close just with a moment of silence, of visualizing the shining bright light of divinity within you, ever present. And as we close, let's do one of our practices of sharing the light. We'll rub our hands together and you visualize yourself as a divine channel, sharing the light with all, with 3 ohms. Om. 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 Peace. Amen. Okay, great souls. Thanks for coming tonight. So good to be with you.
Who's here? I quit being able to put them into my phone. Other than you, Margaret, I have your email address. If you'd like the link to last week's class, let me have your email if you weren't here last week. Okay.